There are new people tonight. Great. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Lots of great speakers here. So thanks for coming. Yep. So we're Silicon Valley Health Institute, formerly known as Smart Life Forum. It's been a while since we changed over. So I'd like to welcome everyone. My name is Robert Miekemeller. I'm a member of the board of directors here. We've been around for almost 20 years now, so always something new and exciting to learn. Always cutting edge information here, and that's what we try and bring to you is cutting edge information with great world-class speakers. We're a membership-driven organization, so it's $10 at the door and $60 if you pay for a year in advance, which is just a great deal, $5 per meeting. It's a nonprofit organization, so any donations and any memberships and friends that you can invite and bring here is greatly appreciated. So a couple of logistical items. If you can, silence your cell phones. And if you're concerned about EMFs, then go ahead and turn them off. If there's an emergency call or something, please take the calls outside so we don't disturb our speakers. The meeting is streaming live on the web, so if you are a member and you don't make the meetings, you can always go online and see them streaming live. So welcome everybody out there in the world that's seeing and viewing our meeting tonight. We're happy to have you here as well. So. The location of the restrooms, if you go out the door here and go straight down, first left you can take. It's about 100 feet down on the right side. There's two groups of restrooms right there, men and women. So let's see. We do have some announcements to make. Kind of a sister organization of ours is the Susan, what's it called again? Yeah, FMBR. They changed their name recently. Institute for the Advancement of Science and Consciousness. They have a meeting Friday, January 23rd with Peter Russell on the evolution of consciousness. Their website is i-asc.org. So if you're interested in that talk, that's at Unity in Palo Alto. So that's coming up next Friday. We also had a member that passed away. If any of you know Dee Grief, she recently passed away. So we like to mention those things to keep our members informed. Are there any other announcements that anybody has or would like to make? Anna, I think we sent out an email.
Our place was our car before we did. So hopefully he maybe has problems finding it. But please consider coming here. We're going to have a EMF workshop on Saturday morning in San Carlos with Dr. T.
So there's flyers up here. If you're interested, come up and pick up a flyer. So at the beginning of the meetings, we usually like to open up the floor here. We have several experts. I've been a nutritionist since '92. We have Steve Fowkes, who's a technical director, a chemist, and Susan, our president, is a wealth of information, and I'm sure a few others in the audience here too. So does anybody have any questions or any thoughts? Hold on one second. And if you have questions, wait for the microphone. And during the meeting as well, after with the lecturers, if they have questions, we use the microphone to keep it live and keep it so that our listeners streaming can hear as well.
My 19-year-old son has epilepsy, and he's on Keppra, and I'm reading more and more about the addictive and brain-damaging properties of Keppra. So I was reading that the folic acid would prevent that, or at least hold this off a little. Any input?
Keppra is a medication that makes me feel uncomfortable as well. It causes behavioral disinhibition. It can cause psychotic symptoms. I think seizures, a ketogenic diet has helped, but I think Steve will be able to add a lot more on this topic.
Yeah. Sometimes people grow out of seizures. It's not that common to see seizures in children, for example, where eventually they don't need medications. But all of the primary anti-epileptic drugs are membrane fluidizing substances. So they counteract a kind of membrane rigidity that can cause nerve cells to malfunction. And anything that increases the fluidity of membranes, like, for example, polyunsaturated fatty acids or vitamin E, for example, can have anti-epileptic activity. The protocol that has been very, very successful in the past is a ketogenic diet. And that, in its extreme, tends to run, 90% fat. So it's a diet that's very, very difficult to comply with. But milder forms of that, where you just do protein restriction and allow the body to go into fat-burning mode, tends to work fairly well, even though it's not quite as efficacious. And that doesn't work as much by membrane fluidity as it does by just increasing the energy available to the neurons that would otherwise be in the surrounding area, and normalizing neural function so that you don't have triggering events that take place that initiate epileptic attacks. So it's not that difficult to try a ketogenic diet or a ketosis diet of just restricting carbs. The other thing that I would consider would be looking at inflammation as a possible neural trigger. Many different symptoms can result from the eating of foods that would be like wheat or corn or yeast that would be allergens, and the inflammatory events irritate the brain and make them more susceptible to these kinds of things. So I would recommend trying not only methyl donor compounds that are mentioned earlier, like folic acid and stuff like that, trimethylglycine, but try the carb restriction and food restriction diets.
Any other questions?
Does anybody know for pterygium, like this outgrowth of conjunctiva towards the iris, any natural approaches besides surgery? Everybody knows what pterygium is. Sometimes people have the white of the eye growing over the iris, and wondering about that. And the solution is to cut it out. Yeah.
That's a good one. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that at all, and yeah, that's a tough one. Great question.
It's my pterygium.
Okay.
And I need surgery, so I haven't taken the time to ask.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, we can touch base and maybe find a little research on that. So, okay.
Just coming back to the epilepsy, and of course a 19-year-old who's going to college is not really good with his food intake. Vitamin E and folic acid, what's the quantity there? What's the...
Dosage amounts are always an issue, but he's 19, so full dosage, but there could be therapeutic amounts as well, so, it's 5,000 IU for vitamin E.
I would never push vitamin E that high. E. Yeah. Vitamin E is a lipid antioxidant, the primary lipid antioxidant in the body, and therefore it does protect the lipids of the body from peroxidation reactions and free radical reactions. So yeah, it's not. It's in my opinion, it's not necessary to go very high in the IUs, and I would suggest that there are. If you focus on IUs, you're likely to be seduced by the dark side of the force, in that the alpha tocopherol is very high in international unit activity, and the actual membrane protection is best afforded by the mixture of all the tocotrienols and tocopherols, and so that would have a lower rating and be generally more applicable. Methyl donor, do you happen to know his MTHFR status? Okay, that's a gene that's mutant in roughly 30% of the people of the world. And MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. It's an adaptation to northern altitudes. Or northern latitudes, and so you find it in roughly half the population if you live in northern Europe and in Scandinavia and Finland and places like that, and it's relatively common in the population, and 30%, and that would interfere with folic acid metabolism. So it wouldn't just be about taking folic acid; it would be about what kind of folic acid to take, and that would probably be something other than folic acid, like folinic acid or 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. But methyl donors, if there's a methylation problem, in a teenager, it's always going to be a compliance issue. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. And so something like trimethylglycine might be a better choice to normalize methylation reactions, because it's very inexpensive. You can put it in capsules, you can dissolve it in water, and it's sweet. So it has no bad taste. And so you might be more likely to get compliance with something like that.
Any other questions?
I'd be curious if anyone has any interesting feedback on switching to distilled water drinking. Been doing a lot of research with some folks on that, and seems to be a lot of conflicting information about the minerals. Some say we don't need to get our minerals from water, but from organic foods, and others say you would die if you switched to that. So yeah, I'd be interested in any feedback on that.
You should always go back to nature rather than listen to opinions of people. And nature does not have zebras that are afraid of doing this or that. But when people are exposed to water in nature, it would not be distilled, it would not be lacking any minerals, and therefore that is one source of minerals. But obviously the more important thing is not where you get your minerals, but how you avoid losing them, and how you absorb the little bit that is available in your food. Most of it would have come from food, because there's a reason to believe that humans were evolving around very salty water environment, where they would be eating a lot of seaweeds, very salty, and they would be eating a lot of plants that have a lot of minerals in them. They wouldn't need to drink salty water very much, but they would eat a lot of salt. That's wholesome, and they would get lots of minerals that way, mostly through food. I don't think we would have had this argument in nature. I think that people in nature didn't drink that much water as they do today. That 8 glasses per day is an old thing that I think in about 20 years people will laugh about the concept and say, wow, how could we be so silly to drink so much water when we actually make water every time we eat fats and carbs and other calories. We make water inside our cells, which is far more important than drinking a lot of water, which doesn't get into the cells but gets very quickly into the kidneys, make you urinate quite a lot.
Okay, any other questions? Oh.
I guess this is both an answer and a kind of an announcement. As Dr. T mentioned, the ability of water to get into your cells is not necessarily a matter of drinking water. People who have hypometabolic conditions, low metabolic rate, cold hands and feet, tendency towards constipation, night owl syndromes, things like that, will often have a tendency towards edema, which is a medical term for water retention. And you can get this by, well, it's a common endemic thing in our society for a lot of different reasons. Some of them having to do with toxicity and other things having to do with, the artificial food that we eat. But in this situation, the water can't get into the cells efficiently, so it accumulates in the extracellular spaces, and it causes the tissues to become very fluid, overhydrated, or soggy would be a better term for it. And this leads to snoring and, in severe cases, apnea. And so it's not a rare phenomenon. Now, there is a technique that was developed probably not quite 100 years ago now, by Dr. Emmanuel Ravisi for measuring hydration through a surrogate marker, which is potassium utilization. And he found that water utilization and potassium utilization were inversely related, and you can actually measure your potassium status by looking at the amount of potassium in your cells versus the amount in your serum, for example, is a good marker. And everybody gets their serum potassium measured, but very few people get their cellular potassium measured. Well, there's a very, very inexpensive way to measure cellular potassium, or closely approximate it, by measuring something called total blood potassium. In that, you just take a blood sample and you dilute it in an excess of either distilled water or deionized water, and all the cells rupture. And all that massive amount of potassium that's inside the cells gets released and then gets measured. And by measuring the unlysed cells, unruptured cells, with the ruptured cells, you can then see the ratio between the interior and exterior potassium compartments and infer what's going on with hydration. Now, this is not a standard test. This total blood potassium test is not a standard test. You can get a cellular potassium test, but they tend to run more than $100 when you get it, whereas this total blood potassium test is like $5 or $10. $15 if you pay full retail, without a discount through insurance. And I'm talking to one of the local practitioners in the area about working with the lab to set this up, and if I can arrange to have this done, I can refer everybody in the room to that particular practitioner for having those samples run.
Okay. Any other questions?